30 years ago, countless monsters emerged from portals, plunging the world into pure chaos. But in the present day, a bottle of liquor is thrown to the ground as someone complains about yet another damned portal. The same person who discarded the bottle kicks a metal railing and rants that both hunters and portals could go to hell, as he doesn't care anymore due to this filthy, miserable world. This man, with a bruised face and tears streaming down in a mix of rage and sorrow, yells, questioning what he did to deserve such suffering. He's interrupted by a guard warning him to step down from the railing because it's dangerous. But the man only shouts back, asking why he should listen, and whether he doesn't even have the right to die if he wants to. While the guards try to calm him down and coax him to come down, it's no use. He insists they leave him alone, shouting that they couldn't possibly understand his pain after everything he's been through. 3 hours earlier, in a massive building belonging to the Biction Guild, the same young man was yelling, questioning if he'd really been fired. He demanded to know if they were aware of how much he dedicated himself to the guild. In front of him, a man sitting behind a desk asks what he's actually accomplished for the guild. He was practically nothing more than a pack mule, hired 7 years ago for appearing diligent, but in all that time, he hasn't achieved anything, hasn't advanced beyond rank D, and now he's limping and crippled. Our protagonist tries to argue, but the guild leader coldly tells him to stop trying and just leave, assuring him that compensation will be calculated. However, the protagonist protests, saying he could find a way to heal his injured leg and continue working. The discussion is interrupted by a muscular man with blonde hair and tattoos who sneers at him, asking if he truly doesn't understand plain language, pointing out that the boss already told him he's fired. The protagonist recognizes the man as Lee Youngjin and demands to know how he can treat his senior this way. But Youngjin merely mocks him, asking why he's acting like an old man, calling it pathetic. Youngjin advises him to take the damn severance package and buy himself some snacks like the pathetic rank D hunter he is. Finally, he calls the protagonist by name Lee Taejin. Enraged, Lee Taejin grabs Youngjin's tank top, accusing him of being the reason his leg was injured due to Youngjin's recklessness during an attack. Youngjin simply scoffs and asks when Taejin ever asked to be saved. He coldly states that Taejin was just a pack mule and had no business being on the front lines. He blames Taejin for not knowing his place and sarcastically questions how a loser like him could have an S-rank ability. Referring to Taejin's skill, explosive growth, he mocks it as a bad joke, suggesting that Taejin's growth plates must be sealed. Unable to stand the insult, Taejin clenches his fist and tries to punch Youngjin, but his strike is effortlessly blocked by a small barrier that forms around Youngjin's hand. Youngjin warns Taejin to stay in his place before delivering a direct punch to his stomach, causing Taejin to spit out and fall to the ground. Grabbing Taejin by the collar, Youngjin tells him he's tired of Taejin acting superior just because he started a few years earlier, and says this is the perfect opportunity to see how tough Taejin really is. Youngjin begins punching him repeatedly in the face. In the background, the guild leader accuses Taejin of several crimes, a mere rank D challenging a rank C, disrespecting his superior, and worst of all, the crime of being Lee Taejin. Youngjin drops the battered Taejin to the ground, leaving him sprawled out. An envelope of money falls beside him as the leader thanks Taejin for driving his ass around for all those years, but informs him they'll never see each other again. Taejin can only cry as the scene shifts to nighttime. Now our protagonist exits a small store after purchasing a drink and heads to the bridge from the beginning of the story. He takes a sip, remarks on the drink's good taste, and then holds the envelope, bitterly questioning how, after 7 long years of work, all he has to show for it is a measly bundle of money. Feeling he has nothing left to hold on to in this world, he climbs onto the railing. However, as soon as he does, a system window appears, warning that his life is in danger and asking him to step back. Taejin scoffs, complaining that only now the damned system cares about him. He sarcastically asks the cursed status window if it knows how much he's suffered in the past 7 years. He punches the window, blaming everything on the useless skill he received. He keeps hitting it, lamenting that the skill doesn't boost any of his stats. In response to his aggression, the status window notifies him that it is going on strike. Taejin bursts into laughter, mocking the system and telling it to go ahead since it's useless anyway. He orders it to disappear and throws the bottle at it, shattering a glass. Taejin begins brooding over his past, shouting that if the system had explained the skill properly from the beginning, none of this would have happened. He screams into the night, begging God to hear him, that this nightmare wouldn't have happened and he wouldn't have such a miserable life. The status window begins glitching, flickering with visual distortions, before finally notifying Taejin that his complaints have been received. We return to the present. Taejin argues with the authorities, urging him to step away from the edge, but as he shouts that they don't understand his suffering, he slips and falls. Looking up at the guards as he plummets, he wonders if this is really how it all ends. Surprisingly, he finds it almost comforting, thinking it might be for the best since there's no point in living in such a cruel world. But as he falls, the status window reappears, notifying him that the administrator has received his complaint and he will temporarily be transported to the administrator's server. Confused, Taejin glances down, seeing a massive surge of energy envelop him. Multiple windows appear, announcing an update to the status system. Finally, the status window turns golden, notifying him that the update is complete. Suddenly, Taejin wakes up to sunlight on his face and the sound of birds chirping. He places a hand on his head, complaining about the pain and wondering what kind of nonsense he had gotten into by drinking alone like an idiot the previous night. He promises himself that if he ever drinks again, he'll imitate a dog as punishment. But in a sudden flash of memory, he questions whether he had actually fallen the previous night and recalls seeing something about a status window update. However, he dismisses the idea, thinking it was just his imagination running wild. In any case, he's now an unemployed man, pondering what the hell he's going to do to make a living. He wonders if he should take up day labor, considering that joining another guild as a hunter will be nearly impossible for a while. As he mulls over his options, he's interrupted by a small hologram of a blonde, pointy-eared girl who asks if he's satisfied with the latest status window update. Naturally, Taejin is startled by the sudden appearance, stumbling backward and yelling, asking who she is. With an air of nonchalance, she introduces herself as Miri from the status window management department. Taejin questions whether any of this is real, asking if what happened the previous night wasn't just a dream. Miri quickly confirms that it was indeed real. She informs him that they reviewed his complaint about explosive growth and discovered, after an investigation, that his status window had been outdated, which caused it to malfunction. This revelation leaves Taejin stunned, and the lighthearted laugh at the end of her statement doesn't help. He demands to know how such a thing could happen. Miri explains that she can't disclose the reasons for security purposes, but assures him that the issue has been resolved. His status window is now fully functional, and he'll start evolving as intended. However, instead of feeling relieved, Taejin grows furious. He turns to her, shouting that all his efforts were in vain. Every bit of hard work and training over the years had been wasted because of a malfunctioning status window. Startled, Miri tries to calm him as he grabs her by the shoulders, his face contorted with rage. He asks if she wants to die for what she's done, demanding to know how she plans to compensate him for the 7 lost years. Terrified, Miri pleads for him to relax and assures him that she has restored all the attributes he should have had and even healed his injuries. Taejin lets go of her and examines his leg, moving it around. He realizes he no longer feels any pain, marveling that it's in perfect condition. He asks how she managed it. Miri offers to explain, but first mentions that for explosive growth to activate, a special trigger is required. She begins proposing a challenge to him. The scene shifts to the middle of the city, where green energy swirls in the sky. From it, tentacles emerge, followed by a massive creature spewing acid. The sight causes the crowd to scream, with people calling for the containment team. The creature, resembling a beholder with multiple faces, descends to the ground. In the midst of the panicking crowd, Taejin exclaims in disbelief, questioning if Miri is seriously sending him to his death. He insists he has no chance against such a monster, but Miri encourages him, expressing her faith in his abilities and reassuring him, almost too casually, that at worst, he'll just die. While Miri flashes him a thumbs up, Taejin stares at the creature, which opens up like a flower, releasing venomous spores. Such a creature would typically require at least a B-rank hunter, and even an experienced containment team would struggle against it. Taejin, hesitant, asks if defeating the monster would truly activate explosive growth as Miri claimed. She confidently confirms it. Still conflicted, he debates whether to trust her. Her sudden appearance and her absurd suggestion leave him incredulous. He concludes that his life is already a chain of unfortunate events and running away wouldn't change a thing. With nothing to lose, he decides to face it head-on, albeit hesitantly. He begins running toward the creature, passing by soldiers who try to stop him, warning him of the danger. Just as he closes in, the creature sprays acid on his arm. Taejin retaliates, delivering a direct kick that obliterates one of the creature's appendages. Instantly, a mission notification appears. A small step forward has been completed. The skill Fearless experience activates along with explosive growth. Taejin, astonished, questions how a single blow could damage a creature of this caliber. As he wonders about the new windows appearing before him, another notification pops up, stating that his stats are improving significantly. We see his status window. He's still a rank D. Behind him, Miri asks how it feels to use explosive growth for the first time. Taejin, wide-eyed, can only say that it's absurdly overpowered. Miri warns him not to celebrate yet. She explains that the skill's true potential is just beginning, and to unlock it, he'll need to defeat all the monsters. As she speaks, Taejin charges toward another spore, killing it in a single blow. Again, explosive growth activates, boosting his attributes further. He marvels at how each kill significantly strengthens him, fueling his excitement to take down more. He quickly eliminates the 5 remaining spores, gaining even more power. Finally, he leaps toward the venomous spore, thinking that at this rate, he could reach B-rank status within a week, maybe even surpass A rank. With a grin, he plunges into the spore's mouth, preparing a punch. The scene cuts to a restored cityscape, where soldiers clean up the creature's remains. Onlookers gather, speculating whether the containment team has arrived. Among the crowd is Yeonjin, who complains about missing the action. One of his companions companions points out Taejin rummaging through the creature's remains. They wonder why a loser like him is there and speculate if he's eaten something strange. Noting his oddly smug expression, Youngjin approaches with his group, calling out to Taejin and Miri. Youngjin taunts Taejin, asking if he didn't understand the hint they gave him earlier. He calls him pathetic and asserts that he'll never amount to anything more than a loser. Taejin wonders internally if they're here to hunt as well. A status window appears before Taejin, prompting a sly smile. With heavy sarcasm, he remarks on how his injured leg delayed him, ironically thanking Youngjin for their kindness. Before the situation escalates, a soldier from the containment team interrupts, thanking Taejin for his help and acknowledging that the situation would have been far more dangerous without him. Taejin's smile turns almost psychotic as he contemplates how everything is falling into place for him. Deciding to seize the moment, he humbly tells the soldier that it was nothing and simply his duty as a hunter. This leaves Youngjin and his group visibly irritated and confused. The soldier continues praising Taejin, marveling at his ability to handle so many spores at once. She's interrupted by Youngjin, who incredulously asks if she's saying Taejin defeated the entire monster alone. She confirms, questioning if there's an issue. Youngjin, still in disbelief, barely has time to process this when Taejin dismissively tells him not to bother the public officials. Grabbing Youngjin and his group, Taejin drags them away, promising to explain everything later. We move forward to a scene where the characters are inside a small building under construction. The blonde guy taunts the protagonist, demanding to know if he really defeated that creature on his own. He continues mocking, pointing out that the protagonist is just a rank D, questioning if he seriously believes such a feat is possible, and ordering him to answer. The protagonist remains silent, recalling an earlier moment when the status window informed him that he had encountered some very rude adventurers. It then gave him a mission to teach him a lesson in exchange for an A-rank skill. This memory had caused him to grin like a psychopath earlier, as he thought about the opportunity to gain a skill just by beating up these idiots. For him, it was like killing two birds with one stone. In the present, the protagonist suddenly drops to his knees on the floor, leaving Miri looking like a complete fool. Taejin, however, apologizes and asks if they wouldn't mind if he gave him a good beating. They stare at him in confusion, while Taejin casually explains that they might be confused, but since he's new to this sort of thing, he's not very good at sugarcoating his words. He asks one last time if they'd mind receiving a lesson. Youngjin's group is outraged. One of them, a massive bald guy, steps forward and questions if Taejin has lost his mind due to the heat, or if this is some sort of joke. He tells Taejin to stop spouting nonsense and reminds him that in this world, people who commit crimes must be punished. He punctuates this statement by striking Taejin's head, trying to push him downward. The protagonist calmly asks if he's serious about what he just said. Then he announces that since the bald man thinks this way, he'll be the one to punish him and that he should take it like he deserves. The bald man starts to question Taejin's statement, but before he can fully speak, Taejin lands a punch straight to his face. The impact is so devastating that it metaphorically restarts his Windows system, leaving the man sprawled on the ground. The rest of the group is left stunned, questioning if they're seeing things correctly, as the bald guy has collapsed all by himself. While they're still shocked, Taejin tells them to come at him one by one. Since they dared to intimidate a superior, he wants to see if they can handle even a single flick to the forehead. The group thinks he's delusional to believe they'd fall to such a ridiculous attack. They question why he seems so confident, asking if he hasn't already taken enough of a beating. As they approach, Taejin, who is preparing a flick, delivers it with such force to the bald guy's head that his face deforms and his nose sprays blood like ketchup. Then Taejin systematically takes down the rest of the group one flick at a time, breaking shields, disarming weapons, and knocking out several members. By the end, only Youngjin is left standing, furious and confused, asking if this is some kind of joke, that his team could fall to an attack like that. Taejin responds that it's no joke. He calls Youngjin by his name, his eyes glowing red, and asks if he still thinks this is funny. Youngjin is visibly disoriented, and Taejin explains that while he might let the others go, Youngjin specifically isn't going to escape. He states that a mere flick to the forehead isn't enough for someone like him and advises him to prepare himself. Youngjin, now enraged, declares that he's going to kill Taejin. He conjures ice spikes and mocks Taejin, stating that it seems like he's unlocked some sort of physical skill, but warns him not to get cocky over a single ability. Taejin, unfazed, looks at him and casually asks when he learned the ice missile skill. Right at that moment, the status window pops up, announcing that Taejin has acquired a new skill. Taejin grins and thanks the status window for its perfect timing. Raising his hand to the sky, he conjures a massive fireball and a Dragon Ball-style display of power. Taejin smirks at Youngjin, informing him that he also has a new skill and is eager to test it out. This is no ordinary fireball. It's an A-rank fireball, significantly stronger than a standard fireball and capable of reducing healing effects upon impact. Taejun asks Youngjin what he thinks of it as the blonde guy stares in stunned disbelief. His ice spikes melt under the fireball's intense heat, and he wonders if it's even a real fireball. Taejun admits that he just learned the skill and isn't sure if he can fully control its power yet, mockingly advising Youngjin to be careful before launching it at him. Youngjin began to be consumed by the enormous flaming ball, his thoughts overwhelmed by how unbearably hot it was. In the end, a massive explosion shook the area, creating a fissure in the building and leaving Youngjin sprawled on the ground. His body was dried out, his clothes scorched, and his hair split in half and burned to a crisp. The blonde guy, barely conscious, wonders what just happened and how he's still alive. Our protagonist mocks him for wetting his pants, adding that even in desperation, he shouldn't collapse to the ground in such a pitiful manner. Taejun walks closer to him and warns him to stop picking on guild members, instructing him to be nice from now on. Youngjin apologizes profusely, admitting that he understands. He calls Taejun senior and promises never to bully anyone again. However, our protagonist smirks and reminds him that there's still one flick left to deliver. Placing his hand close to the blonde guy's forehead, he smiles mischievously, ready to finish what he started. Mari looks at our protagonist collapsed near the bed and tells him to wake up, saying it's time for him to head to the dungeon. She explains that after using too much power, he passed out from exhaustion and remained immobile for 3 days. She wonders aloud if he'll be able to overcome this crisis, breaking the fourth wall and looking at us, while Taejun tells her to shut up. He groans about being in pain, running a fever, and asks if she could just keep quiet. She realizes he's finally awake, and he explains that he pushed his mana to the limit, which is what happens when he's reckless. He got too excited about becoming strong so quickly, but now he needs to focus on improving his mana. Miri asks if he really needs that, considering his incredible growth so far. He confirms that it's precisely because of that growth that he needs to increase his mana. All of his stats have improved except his mana, and if he continues hunting without addressing this, he'll faint again. He also points out that his fireball skill consumes twice as much mana, so either way he has to boost his mana. Mary nods, saying she understands, and asks if there's a way to increase just mana. He responds that there's a perfect place for that, just as the status window pops up, notifying him that 8 hours and 30 minutes remain until his recovery. We fast forward to the next day, where an enormous tower reaching up to the sky comes into view. Its name is Training Tower. Taejun approaches it with Mary, who asks him what the giant tower is. He explains that it's the best place to train mana quickly, and that it's a beginner's dungeon. She looks puzzled and asks why, if it's so well known and effective, they're the only ones there. He explains that in the past, it was a popular spot, but it's fallen out of fashion nowadays. As they talk, an old man approaches, calling out to his grandmother and asking if she's really returned. This confuses our protagonist, who wonders what's going on with him. Taejun approaches and states that he wants to do the tower's training mission, but the old man mishears and says something about not eating fast food, directing it to his grandmother. Our protagonist clarifies that he wants to do the mission and isn't asking for fast food. The old man asks if he's really there to challenge the tower's mission, then tells him to follow along, offering to guide them through the tower. Miri comments nervously about how uneasy this makes her, but Taejun assures her that he's prepared. The old man begins explaining the tower, but is interrupted by our protagonist, who explains that the tower is divided into 10 stages, and upon completing them all, the mission is cleared. He elaborates that the first stage involves defeating a group of goblins. The old man confirms this, and Miri remarks that Taejun seems to know a lot about the tower. Taejun responds that no one knows tower strategies better than he does, as he couldn't physically participate in expeditions, but studied them extensively on YouTube and memorized all the strategies he saw. He concludes by saying that the beginner's dungeon will be a piece of cake for him. Miri congratulates him, and the story notes that Taejun is indeed an excellent theoretical learner. The old man asks what he said, but Taejun brushes it off, pretending he was just talking to himself. Shortly after, they find themselves inside the tower, where the old man tells them to begin the first tests, striking the ground with his staff and summoning the monsters. As Miri comments that 10 goblins should be nothing for Taejun, 3 small goblins approach. However, behind them, an enormous group of ogres emerges. Taejun, confused, wonders if it's bulking season. He tries asking the old man why the goblins look like ogres, but the old man simply mutters something about kimchi soup. Frustrated, Taejun calls the old man Sanao. Without delay, the massive group of ogres charges at them. Miri asks Taejun what he's going to do about the approaching monsters. Clenching his fist, Taejun gathers his fireball magic and hurls it at the group, setting them ablaze while shouting that he'll crush them. As he celebrates, watching the monsters burn, Miri warns him that there are still enemies left and tells him to be careful. An ogre sneaks up behind him, and it's too late to defend himself as it lands a direct blow. Fortunately, he blocks it and counters by using the staff for leverage, launching himself into the air and landing a direct direct kick to the ogre's face, challenging it to show what it's got. With just one kick, the ogre collapses. The status window pops up, notifying him that the first stage has been cleared perfectly, and that, thanks to explosive growth, his experience has increased significantly. The old man laughs and congratulates Taejin on clearing the first floor so quickly, commenting that it looked too easy. Taejin, trying to suppress his rage, says it wasn't easy at all and was much harder than he expected. The old man ignores him and instructs them to proceed to the next stage, further infuriating Taejin, who feels an increasing urge to attack the old man. From that point, our protagonist explains that the dungeon was completely different from what he had anticipated, with monsters far stronger than usual, overwhelming numbers, and absurdly higher levels of physical and mental difficulty. He finally understood why no one came here anymore, not because they almost died at the start, but because this place was utterly impossible to clear for beginners. It was hell itself. We see our protagonist going through numerous test stages, and in the end, as he screams for mercy, Miri calls out to him. He kneels at the final stage of the tower, facing an enormous creature. In front of him stands the final boss, a massive three-headed dog with golden chains around its neck and reddish fur. This is the Hellhound, level 90 rank S. Our protagonist thinks back to the forest, where he once thought of hellhounds as merely mean dogs. But this was on an entirely different level than anything he'd encountered before. He mutters that they should just give up on the reward already, admitting he couldn't defeat this thing even if he died and came back to life. Worse still, he's out of mana. However, a hidden mission suddenly appears, instructing him to heal the senile NPC. It explains that the NPC is causing disorder in the dungeon, and restoring his health would bring the dungeon back under control. Our protagonist wonders how he hadn't thought of this earlier and recalls that the entire tower was constructed using the old man's mana. Since the old man can't control his own mana, the monsters are running rampant. If you could just restore the old man to normal, he could complete the dungeon. Miri asks if he's come up with a plan, and he confirms he has, though he's not sure it'll work. He starts running toward the old man while recalling something he heard before. When a powerful mage loses control of their mana, they lose their mind due to an overload of magical energy. At that point, they can barely think. The old man's mind is like a massive tangle of mana threads. Our protagonist rushes behind the old man while Miri shouts, asking what he's doing. Grabbing the old man's head, he prepares for action. In a swift motion, he starts massaging the old man's head, relaxing him into nirvana. Our protagonist thinks that at first glance, this might just look like a massage, but in reality, he's redirecting the scattered mana back into its proper pattern in the old man's mind. He assures himself that somehow, he'll fix this and restore the mana's flow. However, Miri interrupts, shouting for him to be careful as a massive pink fireball heads their way. Desperate, he begs the old man to snap out of it while accelerating his movements. The fireball strikes, creating a huge explosion that bursts out of the tower. Yet our protagonist isn't hit directly. A voice speaks, remarking that the old man's body seems to have caused a lot of trouble, acknowledging all that has happened and finally calling him Young One with a chuckle. We then see that the frail old man has transformed into a muscular figure, and his staff has become enormous. Our protagonist asks who he is now. The old man replies that it has been a long time since his mind was so clear. Before he finishes speaking, the massive hellhound lunges to attack. With a single motion, the old man not only tears off a chunk of the hellhound, but also destroys the top of the tower. Finally, he thanks our protagonist, calling him a benefactor and saying that if he has any wish, he need only say the word. The status window appears, notifying that the hidden mission has been completed and a reward has been granted. We move forward a bit to the old man doing squats with the staff on his back. Reaching the 100th, he throws the staff against the ground, breaking the floor while saying that high-intensity training is preparing for moments of intense mana usage. He then starts showing off bodybuilding poses, claiming that this is precisely what made him an archmage. He is the archmage Elkeroid who asked our protagonist if he can feel the mana radiating from his muscles, telling him to touch them if he wants to. Our protagonist refuses, saying he didn't need to, but the old man says that this type of power is not unnecessary and adds that he hasn't heard what he wanted yet and that anything is valid. Taejin informs him that he has little mana and hopes that the archmage can increase it. His limit is 200. Elkeroid says it wouldn't be difficult for him, talking about the body mana technique, mana accumulation technique. He punches the poor guy directly in the stomach, and at that moment, the protagonist starts screaming with light coming out of his eyes and mouth. The status window informs that his mana has been increased by 300, now totaling 500 points. He starts coughing, complaining that he almost died from that. The old man informs him that from what he sees, the problem is not his mana, but his use of the fireball, as he uses too much mana to cast it. Even though the fireball is a basic ability, it is far beyond that, and it's consuming a lot of mana. But he reassures Taejin that he shouldn't worry, as he would help him recreate the fireball. We move forward a little in time outside of this tower, and we're in a building in the middle of the city. We hear someone calling for Taejin, a red-haired girl named Lee Shenao. a rank a hunter from the Myth Guild. Miri, impressed, asks if the protagonist knows the girl, and he replies that she is just an old friend from the hunter training institution. Miri is even more impressed, asking if he really has friends and even a friend. This leaves him irritated, and he questions whether he really looks that miserable in her eyes. She simply asks why she called him. Taejun confirms that he called her to test the new fireball technique he learned from the old man and says that the guild scene is part of Myth has the largest training center in the country. He adds that the old fireball could easily destroy a building, but the current one is even more dangerous, so he needs a safe area to use it. Sien understands and says that he has more connections than she expected. She approaches, asking what he was saying, but he just says that he didn't say anything, nervously laughing. We move forward to inside the location, with Sien asking how he has been since they hadn't seen each other in a long time. He says he's just been fulfilling his duties as a hunter. She suddenly gets closer, asking if that was true, and he asks if there's something on his face that made her get so close. She denies it and says she just wanted to see how much he's changed. Sien says that he always needed her help, but suddenly he seems more confident. This is strange, but another person had also requested to use the training center. She confirms and says that he would be surprised to see who it is. As she clicks to open the door, she notices they already arrived. The protagonist is surprised, realizing it's Choi Jin-hyuk, a rank a hunter and member of the Bikshin Guild. The two stare at each other, with the protagonist surprised and Choi looking very angry. Sien is between them and asks why there's tension between them, since they hadn't seen each other in a year. We move forward a little, with her explaining that the location is a virtual space made from the user's mana, and the power of the training monster depends on the amount of mana used. She channels mana into her hand and creates a small, ugly rat that even the devil would pity, but she calls it cute while asking if he understood. Our protagonist wonders if this thing was really supposed to be cute, while Sien says she's going to grab some drinks, leaving them alone. Taejun stares at her leaving, and behind him, Jin-hyuk stares at him. The protagonist extends his hands, saying that in this place he could create any monster he wanted with mana. He ends up forming a huge ogre to test it, noticing that it worked. In an instant, he sets a series of attacks, splitting the ogre in half, saying that it wasn't even worth the warm-up. While stretching, Jin-hyuk asks if it was him and tells him not to try to act innocent. He asks if he's the one who wiped out the guild's rookies, calling him an idiot. He says that at first he didn't want to believe it, but now seeing him kill an ogre, he realizes it's true, asking if he had unlocked some new power or something like that. Questioning what he is doing now that he is strong, beating his family members who ate from the same plate. Our protagonist stares at him, remembering that Jin-hyuk is one of the few friends he could truly rely on at the hunter training institution. But when Jin-hyuk joined Bikshin, he climbed the ranks and began changing into the person he is now, and they are no longer friends. The protagonist has a very ugly and arrogant look on his face, saying that it was him who did that and asking what Jin-hyuk would do about it, since it was him who beat up the rookies for messing with him first. He steps closer and asks what Jin-hyuk did, besides just watching as he was beaten to a pulp by them, every word making Jin-hyuk angrier. Taejun finishes by saying that he should have stepped in and defeated them with Youngjin. Jin-hyuk loses his patience and grabs the collar of our protagonist, warning him that he has a lot of nerve. But the protagonist interrupts him, saying that he's being strangled and finding it hard to breathe, and since he feels threatened, this would be self-defense. We see Sien entering, carrying a bag and informing them that she brought drinks for him. She is surprised and asks what they were doing, seeing Taejun and Jin-hyuk fighting. Jin-hyuk forces the protagonist to lower himself with a thrust while asking for a break, but the protagonist warns that there will be no rest, while he is surprised by a kick from the protagonist. Jin-hyuk barely manages to defend himself, but he admits that Taejun has gotten stronger and that he will now take it seriously. But our protagonist just mocks him, saying that he should have done that from the start, making Jin-hyuk even more irritated, thinking about when this idiot became so good at provoking. He spins his spear and names his technique, releasing yellow thunderbolts. Bikshin spear technique, first form, Spear of Thunder, surrounding the spears with yellow energy. Sien shouts, asking if Jin-hyuk has lost his mind, pulling out the Thunder Spear in the training center. Our protagonist, as he already knew Jin-hyuk would use this technique, with Miri by his side, surprised and scared, while the protagonist warns that he's going all out as well. Sien and Miri are shocked as he prepares himself, and the crazy guy simply releases a blue fire Kamehameha towards Jin-hyuk. This is the fireball of the rank as Archmage, which also applies a healing reduction on the target, and it was learned from Elkroyd. It leaves Jin-hyuk stunned, wondering if this is really a beam of pure energy. Jin-hyuk complains about the amount of magical power and says he wouldn't be able to block it, but suddenly a figure stepped in front of him, drawing a sword and cutting the energy in half, dissipating it completely, leaving everyone stunned. Our protagonist asks who he is, and Sien shouts that it's the vice president of the Myth Guild, Cha Soo-hyun, a rank as hunter. Soo-hyun states that this fireball isn't ordinary and warns that using such a powerful skill on a teammate could have caused a serious accident. Our protagonist simply says that he's a bit out of energy because this was his first time using using it. Jin-hyuk thinks that, although it was an unexpected situation, it turned out well, and the best part is that Taejun was in trouble. Finally, with a terrifying aura, Soo-hyun stares at our protagonist and calls him. After approaching with a smile, he asks if our protagonist would like to join his guild, while shaking his hand. Jin-hyuk is indignant, thinking that the vice president of the Myth Guild, one of the few rank as hunters in the country, is offering a proposal to Taejun. Soo-hyun states that he had never encountered a fireball with such power before, and someone who takes basic skills to the maximum would be a great asset to their guild. He asks once more if Taejun would like to join them. Our protagonist smiles while thinking that to receive a proposal out of nowhere, he must have been recognized, and Myth is one of the 4 largest guilds in Korea. The 4 guilds are Hongik, Myth, Longwon, and Cheonyin. If he joined, it would be a huge benefit. Taejun speaks aloud to the vice president, who listens, saying that a hunter must consistently train to surpass their limits. Soo-hyun questions this training, and our protagonist states that he promised to duel a colleague to test his limits, while Jin-hyuk denies, asking when he promised to duel. But he is interrupted by our protagonist, who says that during his training with hunter Jin-hyuk, he realized that Jin-hyuk is a mountain he still cannot surpass, and because of this, he couldn't join the guild since there are still many mountains to overcome before that. Jin-hyuk claims he's crazy and tries to warn about the fight, but the vice president simply starts laughing, saying that nothing is more essential than training for a hunter, and that he liked Taejun's spirit. He finishes by asking what his name and rank are. The protagonist states that he is a rank D hunter, and his name is Lee Taejun. Soo-hyun says that a talent like him being rank D is a huge waste, and finishes by saying he will make an effort for him. We move forward a bit in time with the protagonist explaining that he received a letter of recommendation from Soo-hyun to participate in the rank B evaluation in a month. At first he was hesitant, but the higher a hunter's rank, the higher the level of dungeon they can enter. Because of that, he wouldn't be losing out, so he decided to take the test to become rank B. Now, a month later, we are at the Hunter Test Center, and our protagonist is impressed by the unique atmosphere of the place. Beside him, Miri comments that Soo-hyun must really like him since he gave him a recommendation letter so quickly. Our protagonist boasts, saying that talent recognizes talent and no one could compare to him. Miri asks the question everyone is wondering: why didn't he join the Myth Guild, since they were offering so much support? He replies that logically it's because of the money, as adventurers affiliated with guilds have to share part of their expedition and raid profits with the guild. Also, the rewards aren't that great, and his schedule would be packed. He'd work like a good dog, only to be discarded when get injured. He ends by saying he just wanted money and nothing more. While smiling like a psychopath, someone calls his name, making him turn his face around with only part of his body devilishly twisted. He notices it's a girl with silver hair wearing a cat ear headband, asking if he was also going to take the test. This is Yu Se-rin, a rank C member of the Cheonyin Guild. She extends her hand and he shakes it, asking if she knows him. She confirms, saying that rumors had already spread, thinking about how Soo-hyun is completely determined to bring him into his guild. But she gives a mischievous smile as she says she heard he was such a talent that even the vice president of the Myth Guild was after him and had been eagerly watching over him. Our protagonist confirms, thinking that he was talking unnecessarily. Both are interrupted by a man who says he came to see what was going on, but ended up preparing only with a mediocre man, referring to our protagonist, saying this was to show that nothing good comes from a hyped-up banquet. This is Ham Jeon, rank C, from the Whoring Guild. He introduces himself and says it's a pleasure to meet them, stating that he is destined to be the greatest hunter of this era. While our protagonist thinks that he's crazy, a voice echoes it's the announcer welcoming the participants and stating that they would begin the 30-second rank B evaluation test. All the hunters present turn their attention to the woman on stage, and she continues, announcing that she will introduce the hunter who will be their mentor during this time, rank a hunter Choi Jin-hyuk from the Bikshin Guild. Our protagonist is impressed while Jin-hyuk speaks into the microphone, saying it's good to see all of them. He warns that before the tests, you will briefly explain the procedures to them. The test will take place in a dungeon prepared by them, and each of the 8 participants will be grouped into pairs to face the dungeon together. This dungeon has 4 entrances labeled A, B, C, and D. The first pair to reach the end will face the boss with him directly, and even if they get seriously injured, a team will be ready to help. He ends by warning them about a scoring system that will be in effect and that they must keep it in mind. After informing everyone, they would begin the test. If anyone's name was called, they must step forward, take the streaming equipment, and then go to the portal. Finally, Team A is composed of Yu Se-rin and Kang Jian. Team B is composed of Yang Dongjun and Hong Ariam. Team C is composed of Cho Song-yai and Bong Jun-hyun. And Team D is composed of Lee Taejun and Kim Jun-hyun. They were instructed to go to their respective locations, and our protagonist starts talking to the big guy on his team, calling him by name, surprised to see him there too. Jun-hyun says it would be good to work with his senior. Kim Jun-hyun, rank C, from the Bikshin Guild. We see them entering the portal while being observed by Jin-hyuk, who thinks that Taejun will regret using him for his own benefit, mentally warning him that it wouldn't be as easy as he thought. Jun-hyun nods at him. The two enter the dungeon, and inside we see a huge dead serpent impaled by spikes with a skull in the darkness sitting on a throne. We see a flashback to the Bikshin Guild, where Jin-hyuk was asking if Jun-hyun was listening carefully, warning him that Jun-hyun only needed to participate in the rank B evaluation and disrupt Taejun. Route D was designed to be most difficult, and if Jun-hyun disrupted Taejun, he wouldn't be able to pass easily. He then asks if the poor guy's mother isn't in serious condition and tells him to take the chance to make some money to help pay for the surgery, promising a generous reward if the mission is completed. With Jin-hyuk telling him to just trust him and move forward, we return to the present, where Jun-hyun is thinking about how he ended up on Route D with Taejun. Our protagonist points to some white snakes, calling them monsters, and with one swift punch, the three snakes have their heads crushed. He wonders why they're so weak and why they gave so little experience. Jun-hyun is confused by the protagonist's strength and the fact that his explosive growth ability is active, but only increases experience by a small amount. Jun-hyun thinks to himself about how Taejun got so strong since just a few weeks ago they weren't that different. Back at Bikshin, they were at the lowest ranks, but even in that position, Taejun didn't lose hope. We see a conversation between them, with Taejun admiring Jun-hyun's ability to absorb his opponent's attacks and stating that someone with a skill like his would eventually shine, as long as he kept trying. Jun-hyun recalls how Taejun, as a great senior, gave him hope when he had none. Now his mission was to make Taejun fail, and he couldn't help but think that this was the kind of thing only scum would do. But he had no choice. He needed to pay for his mother's surgery, so he had to do it for his family. He approaches the protagonist, calling out to him, and hands him a bottle, saying it would be difficult, so he should at least take it. He explains that it's a buff potion he brings on expeditions and that it would be good for him to use it. Taejun thanks him and drinks it, while Jun-hyun thinks that the protagonist has successfully drunk the paralysis poison and Taejun will become weaker over time. But as soon as Jun-hyun stops thinking, the protagonist starts complaining about pain, saying that some devil is waking up inside him, asking for a bathroom. Jun-hyun says there is no bathroom in the area, and Taejun says there's no choice but to quickly clear the dungeon. Taejun receives a notification from his status window that his resistance to all poison skill is active, while the chubby guy wonders if he has any kind of resistance. Sometime later, deeper into the dungeon, the protagonist observes a huge hole in the cave and says that it's a dead end due to the deep hole ahead, so they should go back. But the design of the place gives the feeling that they're walking in circles. Jun-hyun looks at the protagonist's back, thinking that this is his chance. If he pushes him, Taejun wouldn't die from the fall, and this might be his only chance to disrupt the evaluation. He shouts an apology to the protagonist while charging to push him down, but ends up missing, leaving both of them confused. As the protagonist is about to fall, he grabs Jun-hyun's leg in desperation, shouting, asking if he wants to die by suddenly throwing himself off a cliff. Jun-hyun desperately calls himself garbage and asks to be left to die. And when Taejun asks what he's talking about, Jun-hyun explains that he was trying to make him fail the evaluation by putting him in danger. He finishes by asking Taejun to let someone like him fall. Taejun tells him to talk about it later, and that it's not a good time, as in his mind he's thinking that this time it's serious. He has extreme stomach pain, and he wonders if he can relieve himself nearby since no one will be watching his live stream. But as soon as he looks around, there are 10 spectators. Thinking that he can't let this be seen, he tries to pull Jun-hyun up, but the ground gives way, and they both fall to the bottom of the pit. After the fall, both of them complain of pain in the darkness when a strange animal sound appears, and countless snakes emerge from the darkness, heading toward them. We see the other groups. Team B is in trouble. Both are extremely exhausted, and while the observer asks if they'll be able to make it through, Hong Ah-ryum starts screaming for her mother, asking to leave. With her resignation, Team B is eliminated, while poor Yang Dong-jun is left behind, asking for help. Meanwhile, in Team C, they're fighting each other, almost leading to their elimination. Then the last one left is Team A. The observer asks if they'll be able to make it through as we see Yu Serin speaking to the camera, announcing that they will defeat the 1,000-year-old white snakes. As soon as she says she's ready, she looks back to see Kang Jian charging at the snakes, shouting "Aura, aura, aura, aura" like Jotaro. She gets scared because he's doing everything by himself, while Kang says this evaluation will get him noticed by his boss, and he won't let this chance slip. She complains that he wants all the spotlight for himself, but she won't let that happen. Raising her hand, she uses her freezing wind skill, freezing many snakes as they are hit. She shouts that she won't be a secondary character. She will be the main character of this test. Team A advances in the test, meeting the expectations as the potential of the 4 major guilds, and they are the first to enter the boss room. They arrive in front of the Jin-hyuk, who congratulates them for making it this far and says he will lead them to the boss. Yu Serin asks if Taejun hasn't arrived yet, and Jin-hyuk responds that since Team D doesn't have a livestream, they've probably been been eliminated. Kang says he told them Taejun wasn't much, but Yuserin simply says she had high expectations from a direct recommendation from Soohyun. Jin-hyuk asks them to follow him to the boss room, hiding a malicious smile. They enter the boss room and Jin-hyuk thinks about how disappointed Soohyun would be if he found out about this. But all three are stunned by the sight of a huge serpent, impaled by spikes, and a large skeleton sitting on a throne, staring at them and saying something unrecognizable. They all wonder what the hell that is. We return to Team D with the explanation of Junhyun's ability, which absorbs magical skills from opponents and returns them to the attacker. The more it absorbs, the more powerful it becomes, but he cannot absorb more than his capacity. And when the absorption meets the Archmage's fireball, it forms a new ability, the Hell Train. The two were sent flying toward the top with a cannon of blue flames coming out of Junhyun's backside. Our protagonist on Junhyun's shoulders asks him if he can still take more, and Junhyun agrees. The protagonist points upward, telling him to head straight for the boss room. We cut directly to Team A with Jinyeok thinking that the dungeon boss should have been the Imuji according to the original plan. However, the Imuji is dead and a lich is facing them. Jinyeok can only think that someone must have tampered with the dungeon. Serin asks if this is really happening and screams, questioning why there's a lich in the area. The massive dead serpent begins to rise as Jinyeok orders everyone to move back behind him. At that moment, the serpent attacks, lifting Jinyeok and causing team members to shout that they can't just stand by and watch. Both begin to attack the creature. However, the lich simply raises his finger, causing ice stakes to shoot toward them, striking them. Just as Jinyeok thinks he'll have to defeat the lich to stop the Imuji, he charges toward the lich's back, only to be held down by the serpent's tail, immobilized. While thinking that he's been careless, he questions if he's really going to die so easily, without even being able to say his last words to Seona. However, his thoughts and the snake's attack are interrupted by the two clumsy ones, who hit the snake's head with the Hell Train, leaving Jinhyuk staring at them confused. Taejun and Junhyun celebrate for reaching the boss room, while Jinyeok thinks that he's happy to be alive, but that's not important right now. He stares at the two clumsy ones, calling out to them and warning them to stay away from the Imuji. While dodging a direct strike from the serpent, the protagonist asks if a lich alongside an Imuji isn't too much for a rank B test. Jinyeok replies that apparently someone interfered with the evaluation, and maybe someone wanted one of them to fail. He adds that it's probably someone who can control the guilds or maybe even someone connected to other guilds. The protagonist says he understands and points at the serpent and the lich, asking if they just need to defeat them. The stressed out Jinyeok confirms and says that he really doesn't want to work with the protagonist. The two agree it's only temporary while they move forward. Jinyeok warns them to be careful while shouting and using his spear to slice through the spikes flying toward him. Taejun assures that he's not distracted and launches another fire Kamehameha against the spikes, eventually hitting the snake's head. Finally, at his side, Jinyeok thrusts his spears forward and initiates the second form of the divine spear technique, slashing at the Imuji from multiple angles simultaneously. With the help of Team A, Serin unleashes freezing energy into Kang's hands, and he charges toward the seemingly defenseless lich. Kang makes sure not to miss this opportunity, advancing with a direct punch that pierces the lich. The protagonist doesn't waste time, thrusting a burning flame into Junhyun's mouth, launching the Hell Train at the lich again. They all celebrate its defeat, while the lich remains frozen, but suddenly, they are surprised to see it return to its original state, as if nothing had happened. While reciting unpronounceable words, bones rise from the ground like spikes, piercing all of them in various places. Everyone is wounded by the surprise attack as Taejun thinks that even though the lich is strong, it shouldn't be immune to damage. He wonders what he might be missing, since he doesn't know enough about liches. However, while the protagonist is thinking, Mary's voice asks if he has forgotten about her, informing him that it was very difficult to download the app and hack it. From this moment on, they will fight using the map as their main weapon. She tells him to try hacking the map and fight. He asks her what the hell she's talking about, as she never mentioned this before, but the status window appears showing the loading of the dungeon mapping, acquiring information such as monsters, structure, and details, and informs that it would recreate a map. Once completed, a mental hologram appears in front of him with a screen announcing that Parsley Navigation has been activated. Taejun asks Mary what Parsley Navigation is, and she explains that by using it, he would be able to discover various information about dungeons such as enemy abilities, secret routes, and rewards. This would allow him to learn a lot about the dungeons. Additionally, she installed apps that he could actively use in combat. The protagonist thinks to himself that this is not just a hack to see, but a complete assistant since it has many useful functions. He confirms that the original boss should be the B-class Imuji and wonders where the hell this lich came from. Staring at the lich, it suddenly starts making strange sounds, which incredibly, he can understand. The lich informs that Eridas is happy, and our protagonist realizes he has an app that translates monster language, thinking how creepy this is, and asks Miri what's happening. She confirms it must be a bug, but both are interrupted as Eridas says he's grateful to his contractor for giving him such fresh and strong humans. Our protagonist thinks it's strange because it doesn't seem like a bug, and since he mentioned a contractor, maybe someone summoned him forcefully. The protagonist asks Jin Yuk if he can move, and when he confirms that he avoided the fatal blow, the protagonist says that even if he doesn't believe it, he has found the lich's weakness. There's no time to explain, they just need to confirm and trust him. They stayed in brief silence until Jin Yuk asks what they should do. The protagonist replies that the first thing they should do is annoy him. At the same time, the protagonist starts jumping, calling the lich a skeleton, and asks why he isn't attacking, wondering if his brain is frozen, all while making faces and sticking out his tongue. This irritates the skeleton to the point that he questions if the protagonist wants to die sooner, banging his staff on the ground, warning that he would bring them all down. The protagonist is able to see alerts of where bone spikes would come out of the ground and tells everyone to gather around him, barely escaping them this time. Smiling, Taejun confirms that it's just like the manager said. He can really see the attack paths, and with that, he can execute the plan. He starts mocking the poor guy for missing all of his attacks, and that he really does have a legendary shooting skill, which only angers the skeleton more. The skeleton, furious, launches several flaming skulls, and taking advantage of the moment, Taejun begins coordinating their movements, telling Jian to move 3 steps to the side and Junhyun to move 5 steps back, making both dodge attacks that almost killed them. As John praises their skill, Irida starts shouting that they're good at dodging, but he wants to see them dodge the next one. As dark energy emanates through the room, the protagonist sees that there are warning signs of the attack everywhere, making it impossible to dodge. While they ask how they should dodge, Taejun thinks that it's a huge attack area, and there's only one way to avoid it. Meanwhile, Iretus announces his ability, the Requiem of Death. It generates mass destruction, annihilating everything around him, and when it finishes, he calls the humans idiots, saying that when they dodge too much, it's easy to use an ability that cannot be dodged. However, the lich is surprised when the protagonist shouts for them to go, and the 3 of them, Jingyuk, Taejun, and Seren, emerge from the smoke generated by the ability, while the protagonist yells that the lich's abilities are on cooldown. The lich screams, asking how it's possible that they survived that and what's going on. The text explains that the Requiem of Death is an area attack ability with a vast range, where the strength increases the farther they are from the center and decreases as they approach. With this information obtained through parsley navigation, Taejun warns everyone to get closer to him to avoid severe damage. We return to the protagonist ordering Siren to attack, and she launches the freezing wind directly at the lich, immobilizing him. Iridus congratulates them for blocking his attack, but warns that their attacks won't affect him. Knowing this, the protagonist tells them to prevent the lich from moving while he runs toward his back. The skeleton stares at him, trying to understand what he's going to do, but begins to panic. Taejun thinks as he runs that liches summoned by contracts accept sacrifices and remain virtually immortal until the offering is destroyed in some way. Our protagonist runs toward a box full of seals while stating that if he destroys this box, he will cancel the summoning. The lich gets even angrier, asking how they dare deceive him, charging at the protagonist and breaking the freezing spell, screaming incomprehensible words while trying to strike Taejun in close combat. But just as he almost hits, Jinhyuk and the others attack from behind, with Junhyun throwing himself on top of him and the cross spears pinning him to the ground. They inform him that they stopped him and tell Taejun to finish the job. While he thanks them, he prepares to deliver a punch to the lich, telling him to stop. The protagonist's punch opens a hole in the wall, revealing a small chest, and he rushes like a psychopath to grab it. The lich remains trapped by the group as he tries to grab his staff, but Jinhya can only think about whether the protagonist really knew the weakness and if it was truly hidden. He fails to notice Irathis activating his magic as he struggles to rise, thinking it's impossible, and that only he and his contractor should know about the offering. Jinhya continues trying to hold him in place by attacking, but he doesn't succeed, and the lich advances toward the protagonist. Up ahead, our protagonist, holding the box, warns the skeleton that if he continues being stubborn, he will destroy the box, once again wearing an evil smile. The lich stands up in front of the protagonist, asking if he understands the ancient language. Ignoring the question, Taejun states that the lich should listen closely, as it could save his life. Iretus begins laughing, claiming that he is a contracted being and cannot obey any order except from his contractor. Our protagonist simply says that if that's the case, they should just cancel the contract and be done with it. The lich then explains that it wouldn't be possible as maybe an ancient mage could do it, but someone like him would never be able to do such a thing. Taejun then questions if he really looks like an ordinary human to him, leaving Iridus confused. The protagonist not only figured out his magic, but also located the offering, making Iridus wonder if Taejun really could cancel his contract. After thinking it over, the lich kneels, saying he would believe him for now, asking what he desired and affirming he would fulfill his wishes with a strange expression on his face. The protagonist once again thinks about the pain in his stomach and says that first he should undo the skeletons outside, warning that before entering he summons several skeletons. He then looks at parsley navigation while Iridus asks how he discovered that. Meanwhile, we see the rest of the group fighting the skeletons outside, and the protagonist warns that if he lies, his head will be destroyed, forcing the lich to comply. After finishing the summons, the lich asks if the protagonist has any more wishes. The protagonist starts to smile smiles psychotically again while telling him to give him everything he has. The skeleton gets scared, asking what he means by everything he has, and Taejin informs him that he's referring to the items and accessories, asking if he didn't have something to give him. Eratus claims that he doesn't have anything useful, but since the protagonist isn't stupid, he points to the lich's staff, saying it's interesting. The poor skeleton tries to hide the staff, claiming that it couldn't happen, but changes his mind when the protagonist holds the box and says he will break it. The protagonist grabs the staff, and Eratus starts questioning if he could break the contract, saying that if he could, he would do anything for him. However, the protagonist simply responds with a clueless expression, saying that he didn't know how to break the contract, which leaves the lich incredibly confused. Finally, the protagonist tells him that he can't break a contract, since he doesn't even know any summoning magic, advising him to have more sense with his words. Eratus becomes furious after this remark, shouting that he dared to deceive him, but as he threatens and approaches, the protagonist says he warned him that if he came any closer, he would break the offering. Without hesitation, the protagonist lifts the chest and throws it to the ground, causing the lich's body to begin disintegrating as he mutters complaints. In the end, he disappears, saying he was so close to returning. The protagonist and Miri can only comment that even in death, Eratus left in style. The protagonist then kneels, picking up a rotten finger from the ground and asking if that was really the offering, noting it seemed quite important since it summoned such a powerful being. Mary asks who could have summoned the lich, and Taejin says it doesn't matter since he got a great item from it. But Mary points out that there is still another item, indicating a small octahedron on the ground. Taejin approaches to inquire about other items, picking it up to examine it. Noticing he can't figure it out, he just says it must be expensive since it fell from the skull. However, he is interrupted by the rest of the group running inside, asking if he's alright, and he hides the staff in the status window. Jin Hyuk takes the lead, asking if he really managed to defeat the lich alone. The protagonist confirms, saying that the lich appeared without leaving a trace. Hey everyone, did you enjoy this story? I really liked it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story, guys.